racist riots on the streets of Ballymena in the north of Ireland have entered into their third day. Last night, a leisure centre, which had been providing emergency shelter for migrant families displaced by the rioting, was set on fire. It is understood that there was nobody inside the centre during the attack. Stormont Justice Minister Naomi Long has called for an end to the, quote, festival of hate and destruction in which 41 people have been injured. The homes and businesses of immigrants have been targeted systematically by rioters, with some losing their homes to the violence. Migrant households have responded by displaying notes in their window in an attempt to ward off rioters. This, from The Guardian, is an image of a Czech family who have put up a Union Jack in their window. There's also this image, which has been circulating on Twitter. So as you can see there, it's a home with a sign in the window saying locals live here and I work in a care home. There's also a Northern Irish flag and the flag of the Philippines. So the reason for that Philippine flag there could be because the riots were sparked following an alleged sexual assault of a teenage girl by two 14-year-old boys believed to be of Romanian descent. Although it's worth noting that households of all nationalities, including Filipino, have been targeted. A vigil held for the girl turned violent after a crowd peeled off and began attacking homes believed to belong to immigrants in a nearby street. One resident speaking to The Guardian said this: "The riots have a valid point. We are being overpopulated. It sounds like I'm racist, but I'm not. It's like an invasion. I don't feel safe walking the streets anymore. Just yesterday, one of them was following me and eyeing me up." Another said this: "If they can terrorize our kids, we can terrorize the town. It's a way of getting our voices heard. If the government won't put them out, we'll put them out." Amnesty International's Northern Ireland director, Patrick Corrigan, said the following: "We are in the midst of a racist pogrom. Families have already lost their homes and lives may soon be lost unless the violence ends now. We are only a petrol bomb away from someone being killed. This violence is being fueled by racist hatred, stoked by disinformation on social media and amplified by politicians who irresponsibly conflate immigration with crime and social issues which affect all communities. We need politicians to speak truthfully about immigration, not echo vague concerns from the streets or false claims on social media that profit off lies." According to the 2021 census, only 3.4% of people in Northern Ireland are from minority ethnic backgrounds. That means 96.6% are not. We remain the whitest and least diverse part of the UK and Ireland. While immigration has gradually decreased over the last decade, crime rates have fallen, except for racially motivated hate crime, which is now higher than sectarian hate crime. People from immigrant and minoritized communities are far more likely to be victims of hate crime than anyone else. So to discuss the events in the north of Ireland, I am joined by Amanda Ferguson, who is a freelance journalist based in Belfast. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to start by just asking you to talk about how things are looking on the ground in Ballymena at the moment.
Okay, I just wanted to start just with a few things that just need to be corrected. There were people inside the leisure centre in Larne whenever it was attacked. I was speaking to women who were in an exercise class and a brick came through the window and they all had to be ushered out the fire exit, and there were children in the swimming club that had just left and so on. So there were people really terrorised and traumatised by what had happened, and they told me that they felt unsafe and that they felt intimidated and frightened, and they said that the crowds outside the centre were behaving, as they said, like rabid animals. With regard to the flags and stickers that were in the windows of the houses in Ballymena, yes, some residents are doing that. However, I've been made aware in the course of today that it's not always the residents that want those, that it's been landlords and estate agents that have requested that. So that's just, a bit of sort of information that wasn't in the public domain before. With regard to Ballymena, we've seen 3 days of pretty awful racist violence, and the violence last night perhaps wasn't as intense as the previous 2 days. but there's more potential for violence in Ballymena and in other locations. However, where I am sitting now, I can see the rain on the window outside, and even the most committed rioter can be tested by heavy rain in Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Amanda, for those updates and for that clarification. I mean, it's really devastating to hear that there were people in that leisure centre. I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been for them. Could you give us a little bit more context on what has led to this moment? I mean, where do you see the origins of this anti-migrant sentiment comes from? And did these riots kind of take you by surprise?
Not overly surprised, but the intensity of it has been is really shocking and depressing. So we know that at the weekend, the two teenage boys were charged in relation to an alleged sexual offence, that they appeared in court. Now, following the legal proceedings, there was a solidarity vigil with the complainant, in that case, a teenage girl, and that was peaceful. And then in the evening after that, there was street disorder. Now, there has been street disorder in some other areas in Northern Ireland, and some people have been engaged in peaceful protest, but there's been a huge amount of conflation of issues. There have been issues raised around immigration and strain on housing and on resource allocation and public resources, and that's been mixed in with some really just very nakedly sort of racist rhetoric, and people, essentially targeting people just because they're not white, just because they're not local. I was with some of the families that had to flee their home in the middle of the night, and they were terrified. People who are here working and living and trying to make their own way. The issue that we saw over the last 3 days, which could continue again tonight, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll have to wait and see. There was racist rioting last year in the aftermath of the Southport murders. We know that happened in Britain first, and then it took about a week of that happening in Britain before it happened in Northern Ireland. And, I was there as well. And whenever you were talking to people who were at what was described as very kindly described as anti-immigration protests, was people there were victims of misinformation and disinformation. And there were also people who were obviously racist, obviously fascist. There were people doing Nazi salutes. There was some involvement from paramilitary elements as well. And, that was a pretty shocking episode last summer. So, I'm sure that this is going to happen again at some point, which is disturbing as well. But the conflation of some of the issues and some of the responses from the political world have been pretty poor, or have been the subject of a lot of debate on the airwaves and so on over the last few days. But we're in the context of dealing with violence in the midst of being in a jurisdiction that has an under-resourced police service. Police officers from Scotland via the mutual aid arrangements are due to make their way to Northern Ireland at some point to provide assistance to the PSNI. And the police have been very clear on this, that there's no debate about the nature of these attacks. They are targeted towards ethnic minorities and also to police officers.
And kind of speaking about that response, which you touched on there, what has the response from politicians and, let's say, kind of the media more generally to these riots?
Well, there's a few issues going on at the minute. The DUP is the largest unionist party in Northern Ireland. Their communities minister is a man called Gordon Lyons, and he has been criticised today by the Alliance Party, the SDLP, Sinn Féin, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, members of the public, a whole range of people, Green Party, because he put a social media post out last night which referenced the location where people who had fled their homes in Ballymena had ended up in a Larne leisure centre. And then within a couple of hours of his social media post, the leisure centre was attacked. Now, Gordon Lyons has said that he issued his post, which included condemnation of violence because he wanted to stop misinformation with regard to what was happening at Larne Leisure Centre. However, other politicians in Northern Ireland have been very critical of his choices, and I know that that's going to be sort of debated in the days ahead, and calls for him to resign, and all the rest of it. Everyone, regardless of political stripe, has been horrified by what they are seeing. However, what we have noticed is from some unionist political leaders, there has been some sort of blurry commentary on what's been going on that people have sort of raised their eyebrow at. And another thing that's happening is in all of the calls that we're having for people to talk about pressures around immigration and housing and access to public services and ending violence against women and girls, we have seen that the abuse of women and girls. We have seen babies and teenage girls and pregnant women and mothers and workers fleeing from their home and being targeted in the worst way just because they aren't white. So the idea that this is about ending violence against women and girls for the people that are engaged in the violence is just not the case. And then there's that blurry part of Northern Ireland life about how much paramilitaries might be involved in what's going on. So it's a pretty complicated picture. And we also have to talk about the fact that this is happening only in particular communities. It's only at this point is only happening in working class Protestant, unionist, loyalist, British identifying areas within Northern Ireland. It's not something that's happening across the political spectrum, and that's a sort of challenge of a post-conflict society. And we have to ask questions if we're going to question everything else about why these protests are coming from that area. We know that the DUP leader Gavin Robinson has rejected the idea that there's a particular problem within loyalism around racial radicalisation at the minute, but I imagine that's going to be something that's debated more in the time ahead. But it really just has been thoroughly depressing, and most people just wanted to stop, not least the people who are being targeted. But it's having ramifications for Northern Ireland's place in the world, how it's viewed, tourism, businesses, a whole range of areas, commuters, public transport, and so on. We've had rioting in Northern Ireland in the past. We will have it again in the future. So there's a lot there's a lot to be discussed, and also, because of this political row that's happening, that causes a certain amount of instability up at Stormont, where we have that random system of government after the peace process of a mandatory power-sharing coalition government of parties that are diametrically opposed on most topics, which makes governing quite difficult. So there's a lot in the mix around this, but really the people I'm thinking about is those people who are directly affected, those people who are being targeted. And, people in Ireland know, whether it's Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, however you call the part of the world that I'm from, that Irish people have made their homes all over the world. There's a reason why there's an Irish pub in every corner of the world. There's a reason why whenever there's an international story that there's an Irish journalist or a doctor or medic or someone who's made their home elsewhere in the world. It's because we have been displaced by war and famine and economic opportunity and a whole range of issues. So it's very distressing for people who understand what it is to make your home somewhere else for this to be happening where we live.
Manda, I know that you're not a fortune teller, you are a journalist, but I'm going to ask you this question anyway. When the dust settles, what impact do you think this is going to have, particularly on those communities, those ethnic minority and migrant communities, going forward? And what do you think needs to happen for trust and cohesion to be rebuilt?
Yeah, we need to take the viewpoint of people who aren't born in Northern Ireland, or who are people who are making their homes here. Because at the moment we really just concentrate on the constitutional question, on the orange and green politics about the future of this place in the world. And while most of us are comfortable with difference and embrace the richness of diversity and the things that the people from other parts of the world contribute to society here. We do have elements of people who are deeply racist and unwilling to share and unwilling to accept the reality of the fact that, as we are now and into the future, we're going to be a more diverse place, not least because climate's going to displace people in the time ahead. So the politicians need to take this matter really seriously. And, we're behind in terms of representation for people who aren't white. The statistics that you read earlier just show how, white Northern Ireland is. And, it's understandable to an extent when you're dealing with a post-conflict society that it's not going to be as diverse, not least because people from other parts of the world didn't want to make their homes in Northern Ireland. Like, it was only really some soldiers who may have been Black from the British Army, or people from the Indian or the Chinese community were kind of the first people who were mad enough to make Northern Ireland their home. So, we rely on people from other parts of the world to enrich society and to do jobs and to be part of life here. But the kind of rhetoric, in the UK and Ireland debates around immigration just needs to be toned down, because everybody's a human, and at the moment, people who are living here from other parts of the world aren't being treated with the respect that they deserve. And we'll have to tackle all those issues around housing and around policing and around racial equality strategies and integration and educating people that difference is okay, and also respecting the fact that people from other parts of the world contribute a lot to the society we live in, whether that is in the health service or in manufacturing or in hospitality or whatever it is they're choosing to do, academia, whatever it is that. That's okay. And a lot of us are comfortable with difference, but clearly there's a significant whack of people that aren't, and all of the complexity of that's going to have to be poured over in the time ahead.
Amanda Ferguson, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Ash, there are really eerie similarities here, right, between these riots and the ones that took place in England and eventually did reach Ireland as well last summer, both triggered by online rumors, both targeting immigrant households and businesses. Is this becoming like a new normal?
So I suppose maybe I want to start by talking about how some of the specifics of the political context in the north of Ireland may be playing out, and then talk about the things which are very much a commonality with what's happening, here on the mainland. So this is from some reporting by Chris Banbury, which was that last summer also saw a loyalist gang target Catholic and African residents in a spate of sectarian and racist attacks in Antrim town that forced at least one family to flee. A campaign of paint bombs, smashed windows, graffiti and threatening posters took place in the Craighill area. What's interesting here is that it wasn't just immigrant households, those who are being perceived as foreign, who are targeted. It was Catholic households as well. So there does seem to be a piece of the puzzle here, which is connected to loyalist sectarian violence and a particular political culture, and it may take longer to fully understand that. The second part, of course, is what is absolutely shared with what's going on here in Great Britain as well, and that is, I think, a pronounced tendency to understand crime and criminality through racial and ethnic lenses in a way which is no longer implicit, but is highly, highly explicit. We saw this with the misinformation which emerged around the Southport stabbings. So first there were falsehoods being spread that the assailant was an asylum seeker, was an undocumented migrant. And then when the name was released and it was Axel Rudakabana, the emphasis was placed on his Rwandan heritage rather than the fact he was born in Wales. And people who suggested, well, that means he's British, means he's Welsh, were laughed out of town because, well, look at him. His skin's dark, his name is Axel Rudakabana, his foreignness simply declares itself. And what is worrying to me is that we've gotten to a point where police forces are compelled to release data or information around ethnicity and nationality much earlier than they ordinarily would, including before charging somebody. So we saw this just a few weeks ago when a driver was I'm trying to stay the right side of contempt of court laws. A man has been charged with an array of offences, including GBH and driving offences. Allegedly drove his car into a crowd of Liverpool supporters who were celebrating winning the Premier League. The police were compelled to release the information that the suspect in custody was white and British, simply because there were so many people, football fans in an area, already rumours swirling, speculation that it was somebody of Muslim heritage. And I think they felt compelled to release that information to prevent any outbreaks of disorder of the likes that we saw following the Southport stabbings. That is a highly depressing place to be. And while I understand that particular decision being made by Merseyside Police, what concerns me about it is then that becomes a new normal. So if that information isn't being immediately released and isn't being immediately released pre-charge, that can fuel the rumor mill, and I think perhaps even encourage this culture of collective blame, because I think this is a really important point to make. There is not a right-thinking human being in this country, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, national origin, who doesn't view crimes against children, violent crimes, sexual crimes, with complete horror. Every single right-thinking person feels that way. And every single right-thinking person wants children to be protected to the absolute fullest of our capability. The difference is when there is a white British offender when it comes to sex crimes or violent crimes, and when it comes to either a British-born or a foreign-born person of colour, is that in the latter case, immigrants and people of colour have to fear collective blame. When there are prolific child sex abusers of the likes of Jimmy Savile, people who are caught up by Operation Yewtree, or even white group-based sexual offenders, of which there are many, you just don't see them reported in the same way. No white person has to worry that someone is going to try and smash up their car or burn their house down. No one has to make clear that I'm not like this white person who's committed this heinous offense, because it's just taken for granted. Whereas the opposite is true, because the only way in which we are encouraged to understand crimes which are committed either by immigrants or people of colour is through the lens of nationality or race. And that is, I think, the political culture which is, I think, driving this kind of violence and driving this kind of, I guess, pogrom that we're seeing, right? What we're seeing right now in Ballymena is a pogrom, and what we witnessed after the Southport stabbings was also a pogrom. Is this way of assigning a kind of collective blame, because it is that sense of collective blame which then leads to collective forms of punishment and mob violence. And unfortunately, that's something which is driven by politicians, establishment media, the very same people who I think are sincere in their condemnations of mob violence and street disorder. They're creating the conditions for that to happen by saying, well, this is how we understand certain kinds of crime. It's not how we understand all kinds of crime. So if ethnicity and race is relevant when you're talking about child sexual offences when committed by people who are not British nationals or people who aren't white, well, automatically that's going to have to apply for white British offenders. Why doesn't it? Well, because it makes no sense. It's equally nonsensical when you're talking about minority groups as well.
Absolutely. What kind of sits at the core of racism in many ways is dehumanization and depersonalization. And part of the experience of being a racialized person is often being taken not as an individual first, but being taken as your identity first, and being held responsible for often the worst perceptions that people hold of the group that you come from. And it's obviously worth iterating this idea that, of course, violence against women and girls is endemic, it is shocking, it is brutal, and it's very, very serious. But racializing the issue is a method of distraction, and it's a method of weaponizing that very real problem for a racist and divisive agenda. Because ultimately, the vision of the world that is held by these far-right politicians or these far-right protesters is not a world in which women and girls are safer. There's this kind of perverse idea that somehow if a sexualized crime or a gender-based crime is committed by someone who's not white, it's somehow more traumatic than if it's committed by someone who's white or someone who's British. And that is deeply perverse. And it's worth really remembering that the holistic politics of the far right is one in which that deeply dehumanizes and devalues women and does not in any way protect women, as much as that might be used as a talking point in order to dehumanize and demonize migrants, particularly migrant and racialized men.